Our keynote speaker today, I'm very proud to be able to even introduce this gentleman. I've met him sometime. One of the things that I'm most impressed about, and every place I go, people are excited to sure. And I have not seen the great spirituality and enthusiasm for our faith that I have since this keynote speaker came to town. And he's got a particular interest in healthcare, particular interest in wellness, particular interest in mental health, and started the first mental health ministry in the diocese. And so to give him adequate time and adequate introduction, I'm going to introduce to you the Most Reverend John P. Dolan, who is our Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Phoenix. So Bishop, glad to have you. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here. I am a native of San Diego. I served in San Diego as a priest for 30-ish years, and I became the auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of San Diego. I was there for about 5 years until this guy named Pope Francis called and said, go to Phoenix. So that's what happened. So here I am in Phoenix, and I'm suffering, like many of you, from little skin issues, skin cancer. God, in his wisdom, sent me from sunny San Diego to the Valley of the Sun. So I continue to suffer. But I'm very happy to be here because this is a very important topic for me personally. It reaches deep into my heart and into my soul. And the reason for that is because I'm a survivor of suicide loss. When I was in 8th grade, just before 8th grade, we had our funeral for my brother Tom, who had died in Chino prison when he was 19 years old. I was just waking up to this idea that death was a reality, right? You don't focus on it. My grandma had died, and I was just getting used to this. And for someone to die by suicide, that was so shocking to me. My folks grew up. They grew up in Iowa, and then raised 8 children in San Diego when everything was growing and moving rapidly. Right, we were moving into the 60s and the 70s, and a lot was happening. Right, so it was a difficult time, but they did the very best that they could do. We grew up in our Catholic tradition. We went to Catholic school. We were altar servers. We did all the different things that you could possibly do to be a part of the fabric of faith. And they did a great job. I mean, they really did. They're still alive. They're both 94 years old. They're going to celebrate their 75th wedding anniversary. So we're trying to figure out what we can do. But as they worked very hard to try to raise us and to keep us close to faith, to keep us close to love. All of that was there. Everything they did, they poured out their heart and their soul in their children. And that was important. So there was no neglect in our life. And so when my brother Tom died, it was very sad, obviously, for us. And it took us by surprise. No one had a sense of the fact that he may have been suffering from mental health related issues. We didn't know that. Nobody saw that. We figured it was situational. He was getting into drugs. When he was 18, he started to go off, and he and a friend decided on a binge to rob a store. And so the next thing we know that he found himself in prison in Chino, California. And he was young. He was 19 years old in this prison. So nobody knew what was really the final straw that led him to die by suicide, but something happened. And we just hung our hat on that. We didn't focus on any particular mental health related thing. In fact, if we did, we wanted to shun that because no one, especially that in the late 70s, no one wanted to talk about mental health. It was just something you didn't do. You wouldn't be able to do that in society in general. people wouldn't do that, and certainly within faith. And in our Catholic tradition, that was something that was still very, very, it was a very delicate subject. We were just waking up, along with society, to the fact that there may be some mental health related issues that that we need to consider when we're looking at, say, culpability. So when a person takes his or her life way back when, society and religion would have said that was a natural choice that one would have made. It was somebody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to die by suicide. Well, we have come to realize that it doesn't necessarily happen that way. There are many factors that would lead a person to suicide ideation and ultimately to possibly taking his or her own life. But we were just waking up to that. And even within our tradition and other traditions, Christian tradition, you wouldn't even bury a person if a person had died by suicide, because it was seen as such a rational action that somebody rationally chose that. So that was a very interesting thing. Now, my brother was buried and had the proper Christian burial, but it wasn't but maybe, I don't know, maybe 50 years before that time when we weren't burying people who had died by suicide. That's amazing, huh? Truly amazing. But it shows that science was helping to lead the church in ways of our understanding of mental health. So that was an important piece. When my brother Tom had died, of course, it was very devastating, but we were not going to attend to the mental health related issue. We figured it was situational. When I was in college, I had already entered the seminary, and at that time, my sister Therese and her husband Joe were the last to arrive, or so we had hoped, the last to arrive for our Thanksgiving celebration as a family. So everyone was convening at mom and dad's home, and we had a nice, we were getting everything ready. All the turkey was there. And instead of my brother Therese and my sister Therese and brother-in-law showing, it was a coroner. And he told my parents that Joe had died by suicide via asphyxiation that morning. And the reason why Joe had died was because he was asked to relate to my parents that Therese had hanged herself the day before. So we were obviously struck by something. Now we were waking up to this reality that this was a mental health related issue. And yet we were still not quite ready to share it. When my mom would say, that two of her children had died, people would say, well, how did that happen? And she would just simply say, it was tragic. And that was it. And then she would move on. That's what you did. And that was in the 80s. And then my sister Mary was starting to struggle with some mental health issues, and she was diagnosed and prescribed and treated in many ways, but she had attempted suicide multiple times and in violent ways without notes or anything. And this put us into a terrible tailspin. And then the family decided we better get together on this and have conversations about our own mental health related issues, that there's something going on. There's something going on in this family, and we seem to have received a dose of it. So that itself affected me. I was a priest, and I left priesthood for a short while just to address that matter. It was a hardship for me, and to admit that maybe I was dealing with some mental health related issues as well. The stigma is great. And for anyone to share that or to admit to that can be very, very difficult. But once you do, it opens up so many avenues and so many doors for so many other people. So I started to do that, but in incremental ways. And my sister Mary continued to struggle. I had never met a person who had tried to live deliberately each day as much as my sister Mary tried to do that. She struggled. She woke up and she just fought the good fight every day just to live. That's a hard way. That's a hard way to live. Most of us just assume this is what we got. We got our life, and we struggle just to get up out of bed, maybe to get the shower, get that first cup of coffee, and we're checking our boxes and saying, okay, I got through this part of the day, got through that part of the day. But most of us aren't just like struggling to say, am I going to make it to the end of this day? Mary struggled with that. And eventually in 2022, after I became bishop here, just months after I became bishop here in Phoenix, she died by suicide in a very, very violent way. And it was obviously it was a hardship. We anticipated it. We assumed that maybe one day this would be, we were going to wake up and hear that news, and sure enough, we did. Mary was a very beautiful person. My sister Therese, an absolutely beautiful person. Tom was a great, great guy. But they all went to church. They all, had their devotions. They all said their prayers. They didn't, but they struggled with some mental health related issue, and they died by suicide. It was just a sad matter of fact. When I arrived here in the Diocese of Phoenix, just before my sister had died by suicide, a wonderful donor came through and said, what would you like to do with this money? Who does that? They just write a check and say, what would you like to do with that? And I immediately said, open up a mental health ministry office. And I found that to be a very important piece for me personally, but also for, the Catholic enterprise. So what we have done is we established this office for mental health ministry to address three things. One was education. The other was accompaniment. And the third was advocacy. So we wanted to make sure that we were ahead of the game and not behind the eight ball when it came to mental health, and to see that mental health and the science of psychiatry can be connected beautifully to faith. And actually, as the church, we actually believe that both faith and science work well together. When one gets ahead of the other, we start to fall apart. Both have to work together. We have to be hitched together. It's kind of like the guy who was driving up with his family to Wyoming to Yosemite, and he gets pulled over, and a police officer says, your taillights are out. And the man gets out of his car and he starts pulling his hair, pacing back and forth. And the officer says, well, sir, it's not that big of an infraction. That's not a big issue. It's not a big problem. He says, well, it may not be a problem for you, but it means for me that I lost a trailer, my wife, and 3 children. If faith and science aren't hitched together, then we're probably going to have a problem. And what I discovered over working with the Catholic Institute for Mental Health Ministry out of the University of San Diego, I actually helped to found that, which is basically a playbook on how to develop mental health ministries in dioceses and parishes. You may not know what a diocese is. A diocese is a collection of parishes. So I'm the bishop of the Diocese of Phoenix. We have roughly about 100 parishes. And it's a collection of parishes that I oversee. But so when I was in the Diocese of San Diego, I worked with the University of San Diego to establish sort of a playbook on how to develop and promote mental health ministries in dioceses across the United States, and then also in parishes within those dioceses. So that was the playbook. And then when I came here, I was working with a deacon out of Scranton who had established um, a mental health ministry in that diocese. And the two of us, he had lost his daughter through suicide. So he and I started the Association for Catholic Mental Health Ministry, which would basically act as a touch point for all of the ministers of mental health ministry across the nation. And now that's across the globe. So I just spoke to the bishops of South Africa a couple of days ago, and they're establishing their mental health ministries. And we had something up in Kenya, and it's all over the place right now, which is pretty exciting. I'm very happy to see that. With the mental health ministry here in the Diocese of Phoenix, I found it necessary that we focus on these three matters: education, accompaniment, and advocacy. I'm going to focus only on education and accompaniment at this time. Advocacy is simply trying to encourage the government, the city, the county, the state of Arizona to do its part. We are behind the eight ball when it comes to psychiatrists and psychologists and facilities, proper facilities for people who are struggling. So we want to do our part to try to try to get the message out to any of the powers that be that we're always going to be behind the eight. We acknowledge that, but we got to do our best to meet the needs of our brothers and sisters here in this state who are struggling with various disorders, behavioral disorders, paraschizophrenic disorders, bipolar disorders, and suicide ideation, and so on. We just have to focus on that. And a lot of it is anxiety disorders, whatever that disorder is, we need to work on it. Because people, they can't be defined by the disorder, but we also need to acknowledge that there are disorders. We can't just pretend that it isn't there. It'd be like telling a person who has a broken leg, "Guy, you're walking funny," but you don't really attend to that person who has a broken leg. That doesn't make sense, right? But that's kind of what we do when it comes to, say, mental health related issues. We say, well, that person's different, and we just move on. We got to get way beyond it and get to a level of true science. And in many ways we are, thankfully, but I think we're still behind the eight ball. So education, from my point, so I want to focus on education and accompaniment. What are we doing? In the world of education, the one thing that I want to keep telling our priests and deacons and people who are open to possibilities, that science and faith have to go hand in hand. You cannot get ahead of the game. So sometimes I call them priests or devil chasers, right? Sometimes people are looking for the devil behind everything. And they're basically saying that this person may be possessed, or this person isn't praying enough, or this person doesn't have faith enough. As I said, my sister Therese, my brother Tom, my sister Mary, they all had their devotions, they all had certain levels of faith. They weren't giving up on their faith. But that's only one aspect of it, right? But if prayer, if we say, well, they're not praying enough, or they're possessed, or they're not going to church. I once heard a priest when I was down in Mexico. I happened to be invited to a funeral, and my Spanish wasn't very good. I was down there just to learn Spanish, and I was with this particular family. They invited me to this funeral, and the person said, the priest said to the grieving family who had lost someone who had died by suicide, he said, and I couldn't quite hear what he was saying, so I had to have them reinterpret. I said, he looked like he was chastising them. And they said, yes, indeed. He said, this would not have happened if they had gone to church, But that was that is something that people will say out of ignorance, right? People will say things partly to fix a problem. And that's one of the issues that I try to encourage our priests and deacons and people of goodwill to not judge, even not judge that they're going to go to hell, or judge that they're possessed, or judge that they don't have faith, but even try to create judgments about why they did what they did. We do that. You know, when someone who dies, just naturally, you'll often hear or say in a eulogy, I wish I had a chance to say, I love you just one more time. There's this little bit of guilt that we often carry with us when someone that we love dies. And it's ramped up when someone dies by suicide. Because so often my parents will be the first to tell you, where did we go wrong? That's their question. That's what they're going to ask. And you have to ask them, why would you want to jump into that pool? Why would you want to assume that you did something wrong? It doesn't necessarily translate. It could. Sometimes things like that can happen where we can have an effect in a person's life. There's no doubt about that. But the first reaction for most of us, including myself, when I was a child, when my brother Tom died, I felt terribly guilty. And it was because at that time I stole a baseball card from him. Amazing. And it's funny how when you're a child, you make that transference, right? You begin to think, I did this. And that happens often when people die by suicide. So the first thing that I try to tell our priests is try to avoid judgment. Just stick with the person, be with the person. Presence, the ministry of presence is the first and most important part of any kind of ministry. Just be present to them. Don't do anything else. Shut up. They won't even remember your words when they're grieving right away, but they will remember that you were there. And that's all that matters. I was given some great, grace, if you will, by my parish pastor and religious sisters. And I just wrote this wonderful article about one religious nun, Sister Mary Kiley. She was a Franciscan sister. And she walked with me, still does, from that moment until this moment. She's still alive. She's still walking with me. She still checks in with me. She's living in San Diego. She'll give me this call. She has accompanied me throughout my life. That's amazing. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't comforted immediately when my brother Tom had died. My pastor poured out his hearts and his prayer and his love, and people, the Catholic teachers, they did their part. But after a while, they get about business. Sister Mary Kiley was unusual. She realized, no, I got to stay with this guy throughout his life. Because as much as it affected my parents, and it still does, I mean, my folks are devastated. Often people will say, gosh, how are your parents dealing with this? Right? And then you want to say, I'm dealing with this too. As an 8-year-old kid, or an eighth grade kid, what was that, 13, I guess, 12, 13. I was dealing with that. And I continued to deal with that throughout my life. So Sister Mary Kiley really had this laser focus on me and my siblings, and she just stayed in touch with us. She was just that amazing. That's an amazing gift. And I remember thinking, gosh, that's what mental health ministry is about. But the science, focusing on the science, going back to that, focusing on science, if we can acknowledge that faith and science can work well together, we're going to be in a pretty good place. And part of that, I wanted just to share with you how faith does act with science. So there are a number of studies that that we can look to. And there was a study published by JAMA Psychiatry, which is basically the Journal of American Medical Association Psychiatry. And it has a number of publications, but what they were trying to determine, going through all of these publications and various studies, they wanted to see that religion may be a social determinant of health, and previous research has shown that, say, attending religious services may be associated with a lower risk of various factors related to, say, despair, including heavy drinking or substance abuse and suicidality. And what I wanted to show our priests and religious the value of this mental health ministry, because there is a correlation. It is one thing for us to say have a religious affiliation, Catholic, Lutheran, or Jewish, Muslim, whatever. All of that's fine. We can have an affiliation, but then there's a whole issue of participation. So I can be Catholic, but if I'm not going to church, those are two different things, right? People can identify as Catholic, but they're not necessarily going to church. And so there are two pieces to this. First of all, affiliation or even participation, we're never going to get to the bottom of suicidality in its whole. We're never going to get to suicidal ideation, because suicidal ideation is you have someone to tell you that they are suicidal. You can't see the hard fact. On the other hand, if a person had attempted suicide or did die by suicide, then now you've got some hard facts. Okay. And so there is a difference between suicidal ideation and certainly acting on that ideation and dying by suicide. So the journal does it will there are various journals, and they'll basically come to the same conclusion that ideation will only tell you so much, and affiliation to a church or participation in a church is only going to get you so much. And in fact, affiliation and participation, when people do fess up and they say, yes, I have considered suicide. Yes, I've actually focused on ways in which I am going to die by suicide. When people do that, they may, in fact, be living within the life of church. I mean, they're going to church every day. Catholics say we have mass every day. They might be doing that. But ideation is a very different thing than the actual moving toward the act. And there is, according to the statistics, there is a greater chance that a person might die by suicide if they are only affiliated to the church. So here are a couple I just want to share with you. So this is, again, focusing a little bit on the science of this. So the Nurses' Health Study, this is in 2020. They had 66,000 women studied, and they had this data from health professionals. It was a follow-up study of 43,000 men. So that's a small sampling. And among the women, there were 75 deaths from despair, 43 suicides, 20 deaths from poisoning, and 12 deaths from liver disease and cirrhosis. Okay. Among the men, there were 306 deaths from despair, 197 suicides, 6 deaths from poisoning, and 103 deaths from liver disease and cirrhosis. And after adjusting for numerous variables, the study showed that women who attended services at least once per week had a 68% lower risk of death from despair compared to those never attending services. Interesting, huh? Men who attended services at least once a week had a 33% lower risk of death from despair. Again, this doesn't focus on ideation. It focuses on the actual outcome, right? And that could be suicide or attempted suicide. Both can be studied. That's a very important study for us. What it does is it points to we who are in the world of ministry that we have to wake up to the science of mental health and to invite people into the life of church, and not just to be affiliated or just having some spiritual connection. Yeah, that would be similar to, say, a person who has a behavioral order with alcohol. So a person who is struggling with alcoholism will often cry in his or her pillow every night, asking God, help me with this, help me with this. But until that person actually goes to, say, AA and starts to have a communication with, say, fellow brothers who are, say, struggling with alcoholism, that person is never going to be able to start the steps toward recovery. Right? So I can have an affiliation and people can say, yeah, I've checked that box. I'm Catholic or I'm Lutheran or whatever I am. But I'm not attending, I'm not participating, and I'm not even opening up to maybe my mental health realities. Then I'm probably not going to get to maybe that first step toward wellness. So that's why I highly encourage mental health ministry in our communities, particularly communities of faith. There is something to be said for that. And it's not just about socializing, connecting, because there's also a level of passion that people can bring to their faith. They have a passion for God, and then that passion can translate into a passion for others, a passion for service. And when we start to get out of ourselves, out of our little circle, and start to have a passion for something else, and church can offer that. We have a Catholic, we have St. Vincent de Paul societies in virtually every parish. We have Catholic charities. We have all these options for people to get involved. But often, until if they don't get out of their own little shell, they're not going to get there. And the only way that can happen is if they see that they have some friends, maybe in their parish communities, to help them get out of their shell. The church still today tries to encourage people to get out of their shell and to do some passionate things, wonderful things. And if people are only affiliated, they're probably going to struggle. That's why I feel strongly about the science of mental health and why that's important to us within our enterprise, our religious enterprise. So in addition to the science, we also part of that science includes and we train each of our priests and deacons through mental health first aid. Are any of you familiar with that? Mental health first aid? Great. So it's a state-run program, and it basically gives you, think of any kind of first aid. So if anybody is, somebody flops over, hopefully a number of us will know what to do. Okay. You offer first aid right away. Mental health first aid is the same thing. And when a person is, say, coming across your desk in a parish, maybe the people we're trying to train right off the bat are our secretaries in our parishes. So when somebody comes off of the street, we want to give them as much of the mental health first aid training so that they'll be able to identify whether this person is just struggling with a situational thing. Somebody in their family died and they're grieving. Okay, that's natural. Or maybe this person is struggling with some form of disorder. Maybe they're on drugs and they're able to identify that. So, and then from there, they're able to offer the necessary aid. So that was a very important thing. Now, beyond the science, we also wanted to focus on, or the educational aspect of our mental health ministry, we also wanted to focus on accompaniment. And accompaniment is basically what I was talking about regarding Sister Mary Kyle. It's one thing for us to just address this person has mental health related issues. This person might be an alcoholic, or this person maybe suffering from, paraschizophrenia or bipolar disorder or whatever. How are we going to accompany that person? How can we do that? We don't have the skill set to do that. And in our mental health ministry, we say we don't diagnose, we don't prescribe, we don't treat. For legal reasons, we don't do that. But we also get right to what accompaniment means. It's love, just loving another person. So mental health ministry is not a program. It's about loving more than anything else. And just as a parent, or say, let me look at Sister Mary Kylie, she loved us. And that's what accompaniment is. It's just honestly, authentically loving the other. It's not about checking boxes and saying, yep, we did our part and took care of this person. It's authentically walking and accompanying with the other. That's work. It takes a lot of work to do, but it's worth it. And so we're trying to get as many people out there to accompany, to walk with those who are struggling. Again, with either behavioral disorders or diagnosed disorders that, again, we're not able to treat or prescribe. And we do this in kind of a systematic way. We have a program, we call them wells, like Jesus meeting the woman at the well. Okay, so great things happen in that great story of John where Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus is a Jew, she's a Samaritan, they don't have anything to do with each other. She's a woman, he's a man, they should not be seen together in public. All of that stuff was going on. And yet he was able to bring a certain level of wellness to her, so much so that she left her bucket behind and she found a certain living water within her, which is a great, great story. And in essence, that's kind of what we're hoping for with these wells. So as I said, the Diocese of Phoenix, we have about 100 parishes, and we've divided those parishes into deaneries. Deaneries are they're smaller clusters of parishes. And we have 15 deaneries here in this vast diocese. We go all the way up to beyond the Grand Canyon. We have a parish in scenic Arizona. So it's 44,000 square miles compared to San Diego, which was only 8,000. It's a lot. But in order to help manage that or to oversee that, we want to make sure that we have these deaneries or these clusters of parishes. And I wanted to make sure that we had a well in each of our deaneries. And those wells be basically opened up to, walk with people, accompany people who are struggling from various mental health related issues, including behavioral issues. So we could have AA and NA and Gamblers Anonymous, all those different things available to people who can kind of come to the well. We always say from well to wellness. This will grow, where they can sort of leave their own bucket behind and find a certain living water within them. So that was one component for the accompaniment. The other was actually training people to walk with a person in a form similar to spiritual direction. Basically walking with them and celebrating those little benchmarks of success. If you ask a counselor or a psychologist, what are you looking for, especially from a person who may be struggling with PTSD? This one counselor, a doctor or psychiatrist, she said, I'm just looking for hope. I want them to identify that they have some hope. And because that's a big benchmark, what you're looking for are benchmarks from a person as they're trying to grow. And all we can do is, because I can't diagnose it, that's not within my field. All I can do is celebrate those benchmarks of hope And then maybe when in spiritual direction, remind them, do you remember how many benchmarks you have made in your life, in your pattern in your journey of life, and celebrate those? That really is a very important thing. We should be doing that with each other. Getting to know a person is one thing, but then reminding them of how far along they've come is another. I think that's what Sister Mary Kiley did for me. Look at where you were and look at where you are now. And look at all the wonderful things you did over these many years. That's a very important thing to hear. It's just a very human thing to hear. We want to hear those things. We want to hear about our little mini successes in life, even if they're small benchmarks. And that's why accompaniment, in my mind, is very helpful. It also brings people toward a real connection with God, with church, and with self. The primary law is to love God with your whole heart, whole soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus, I always remind people, Jesus made it a commandment. You have to love yourself. That's a commandment. And most of us are a little afraid to do that. We would rather not do that. It's a commandment. Love God with your whole heart, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor. Love yourself. If you don't do it, you're probably going to fall on your face, right? And so that's one of the things that we try to get people to acknowledge, that we're talk about behind the eight ball. We're behind the eight ball when it comes to loving self. We're the first to, beat up ourselves, And if one of those things is missing, then we're probably going to fall on our face. We're also doing this in our seminary. So we have these wells, we have these spiritual directors, and we're trying to work on our seminary. When we were in the seminary, some of us were former seminarian. When we were in the seminary, we had to focus on the intellectual life. All of this was part of the spiritual life. People that have this notion of spirituality is prayer. Prayer is only one aspect, right? Prayer is one aspect of my spiritual life. The other is my intellectual life. In what way am I expanding my horizons, connecting dots, and all the rest? The other is my physical life. If I'm not tending to my physical life, then I'm probably going to get sluggish in my prayer and my intellectual life as well. And then I also need to focus on my social relation. How am I getting out of my own box? How am I getting connected to others? We are now also adding this psychological life, because that's an important piece. It's different than social relation. I can focus on connecting with another, but I'm never attending to the fact that I might be struggling with some kind of issue in my life. And that issue can be, we could focus on family of origins, it could focus on alcohol related issues, it could focus on some levels of PTSD, whatever that is. And by the way, that does happen. Those are the things that happen within our seminary life. So when we're focusing on guys who are being formed to become priests, one thing we want to do is have them focus on those four things: the intellectual life, the physical life, the relational life, and the prayer life. But we also want them to focus on their psychological well-being. And so we have in our seminary they have to see a counselor every 2 weeks. So it becomes a part of their formation versus, in the old days, if you saw a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it was because there was something wrong. And now we say, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're the beautiful person that you're meant to be, that God had created you to be. But even Tiger Woods needs a coach, right? To be that, to stay in his game. And we also need, counselors or spiritual directors, but counselors, I would say, to help us stay in the game. And that's why I find that to be a very important piece. And what I like about it is that now our seminarians are fessing up to the reality that, yeah, this is my little disorder, or this is my even a phobia. I'll take a phobia. They'll say, this is my phobia. You know, I have a fear of dogs. Right? So to get over my phobia, I got a little dog. but that, you know, so but that's a quick little fix for me. But everyone has phobias, everyone has some kind of disorder. And that's my premise to this wider conclusion about mental health. I assume that everyone is disordered in one way or another. And that's not a bad thing. If we start out from that angle that we are all disordered in one way or another, then we all know that we're all in this together and we can't judge another. We can't say that's their problem. We say, and we at this point, we would say, it isn't even a problem. If we address it from that perspective, we say, this isn't necessarily a problem. It's just a part of who we are. We're not perfect. Oh my gosh. What an eye-opening reality, right? We're not perfect. And the one who is, from my perspective, the one who is God. But God somehow takes this imperfect world and redeems it and loves it and glorifies it. It's not you know, when you look at your dog and your dog is running around pooping on your carpet, you can say that dog is imperfect, or you can say that dog is absolutely what a dog is supposed to be, right? I'm trying to train that dog not to poop on the carpet, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that dog is imperfect. That dog is perfectly a dog, right? And that's what we have to think of when we're looking at our own selves. I'm not perfect, right? I'm not perfect, but I'm perfectly me. And we're not perfect, but you're not perfect. Boy, as I look out here, you don't look perfect, but you're not perfect, but you're perfectly you. And that's pretty awesome. And God celebrates that and wants to just grab you and hug you and love you, all that. So really, that's in essence the ministry of mental health. It's not a program, it's about love. And if we can just welcome people in their imperfection to a world that of equally imperfect people, we're going to be just fine. Pope Francis would say that constantly about people who are, say, on the streets, or he's a man who focuses on the periphery. He loves people who fall through the cracks, and he wants to find them, and he will look for them. And he talks about accompanying them by looking them in the eye. When you see a person on the street, do you look them in the eye, or do you give them some money and move on? Do you look them in the eye? And he used the word I. He said, engage your equal. I love that. Engage your equal. People who struggle with mental health, we're all in the same room in one way or another. It's some to a great degree, but we're all in this together. And that's why this has got to be a part of our church and our faith going forward. And with that, I think I'm just going to leave you. But God bless each and every one of you. Thank you very much for being a part of it.